Hi everyone, it's Giagia here and welcome to Be Colorful. Today we will continue to use the Tonic Craft Kit 41 to create two more cards, but we will go a little bit beyond the colorful and funny style of the kit. In fact, we will create two cards with vintage and shabby chic style, two alternatives that might appeal to all people who are not usually go for bright styles and pastel colors, but who prefer something more classic. So let's get started with vintage style card number 7. First of all, let's prepare the card base. This time I opted for a slightly larger standard card, that is 5 by 7 inches. I'm using 300 GSM ivory cardstock. For the background panel, I'm starting from an pattern paper. I choose this one here, but you can choose any design. You will see that I'll modify it so much that it almost completely changes its look. It's useful sometimes to start with on pattern paper because the blank sheet could at first block our creativity. So I'm cutting out a panel that is slightly smaller than the card base, which is 6 3/4 by 4 3/4. When I'm going for a vintage style project, I can stay away to use Distress Ink Vintage Photo, which give the project the classic brown shade much used for this style. In particular, this time I'm using Distress Oxide ink, but normal Distress ink can also be used. To apply the color, I will use the blending tool equipped with interchangeable sponges. I begin to spread the color with a circular movement, starting from the edges and gradually moving inward. I'd like to point out how, with this technique, you can give a vintage style to almost all the pattern papers, even those included in the kit. After the first aging phase of the paper, let's move on to another technique that I really like to use for cards with this style, ruining the edges. To do this, I'm gonna use this little tool called Paper Distress. It contains small blades inside, and by scratching the edges of the paper, this will in fact be ruined. The same effect can also be achieved with the scissors blade, but be very careful not to cut yourself. Let's clean everything, and we continue to give the effect of paper worn by the time by curling the corners and making small cuts and then curling the two corners obtained. Next, we can darken the edges with a slightly darker brown. Another aging technique that adds some details to the background is the splattering technique. I'm going to dilute some ink with water and spray the drops with a fine-tipped brush. The larger the tip, the bigger the drops. Another splattering technique involves the use of plain water, feasible from the moment you use a non-permanent type of ink that react to water, such as Distress and Distress Oxide ink. I spray a little water, let it react for a few seconds, and dry. You get ghost effect drops. Now I'm gonna introduce a color to my project. I'd like to use a color palette that includes brown, teal or mint, cream, and a touch of dusty pink. I also spray a few drops of the new color I introduced, and I keep adding details in the background using a few mixed media techniques. One of which involves random stamping. I use generic stamps that contain text. I don't introduce any other colors into the background, so I'm using the dark brown ink again. Then, from the mint embossed paper from the kit, I'm going to make the finishing edges for the background panel. And here you can understand why I introduced this color in the background as well, just to use this beautiful paper. But even this color we have to give a slightly more vintage look. So I'm going to alter its brilliance a little bit by edging it with the archival ink coffee. I don't use Distress Oxide ink because the surface of this paper is not porous and the Distress ink, being a no permanent ink, would risk coming off to the touch. I continue to add some interest to my background with another mixed media technique, stenciling. I'm using the glazier paste included in the kit, altering its bright lilac color with a little vintage photo. And the background is ready. Now let's move on to creating the focal point, a twist shaker ice cream in mint and cream shades. First, I create the outlines of the ice cream on the mint embossed paper from the kit. Then I'm gonna create the twist on the white glitter paper, giving it a vintage tone with archival ink coffee. I'm going to create the ice cream stick on craft paper, where I add a glitter paper background. All the ice cream pieces are ready, so I proceed to create a background layer for the ice cream, using a label large enough to hold the ice cream. I'm going to use the white pearlescent paper of this paper pack. once again altering the color with the archival ink coffee. Does keep the vintage style of the card. Next, I'm going to apply a thin layer of glacier paste with this blending sponge. With a little vintage photo, we also give it a vintage tone. And we get a lovely patina. I'm going to add some background details using the stamp I used earlier and the coffee archival ink. This paper is also no porous, so be careful of the ink you use. If it dries slowly and is not permanent, like the Ranger Distress, you risk ruining everything if you touch the ink. So in these cases, it is better to use inks such as archival inks. Okay, next on this label, I'm going to die cut the window where I'm going to insert the blister to create the ice cream shaker. Perfect. Now I'm ready to assemble everything. Before gluing all the ice cream, I'm going to put the shaker element in the blister. I'm gonna use a mix of glitters and confetti. I'm going to remove the protective film and I glue a piece of acetate sheet on the back so that I can line up the panel well without, of course, turning over all the shaker elements all over the place. I glue everything on the card base and I let it dry by keeping the various layers of the paper pressed with the clips. Meanwhile, I'm going to create the sentiment die cutting You Are So Sweet on craft paper. I'm going to use only the 3 words, so I cut them out by using my scissors. Then I'm going to add a darker shade at the bottom of each word. Finally, I glue them along the lines of the twist. I'm going to decorate the ice cream with a pink bow, similar to the color of the lilac glacier paste, modified by the brown ink. To attach it, I'm using a glue dot. I'm going to finish the card by creating a few drops of vintage lilac drop included in the kit. The vintage drop will cause the distress oxide ink of background to react, giving the drops a more brown color which will adapt perfectly to the rest of the card. For the card number 8, I took inspiration from this beautiful card. First of all, I'm gonna create the card base on ivory cardstock in standard size, that's 5 by 7 inches. The color palette of this card, however, will not only be pink and ivory as in the card from which I took inspiration, but I will also add mint. I then create the 4 3/4 by 6 3/4 inches background panel on the mint embossed paper included in the kit. As with the previous card, I'm going to make these bright colors a little more vintage, shabby chic, but using some peach tones. To apply the color, I'm going to use always blending tools. For the sentiment, I will try to simulate the same black ivory contrast of this card, using the die of the kit, which, however, has the wavy shape, being coordinated with the twist ice cream of the set. So I'll try to change the shape. First, I'm going to die cut the sentiment onto the ivory cardstock. Then I look for a label die that fits the die cut. After that, with a label die of the same set but larger, I'm going to die cut on black cardstock. I'm going to glue the sentiment on the black base. Finally, I'm going to die cut on the pink pearlescent paper included in the kit another label, larger and with a different shape, thus completing the layers of the sentiment. I'd like to create some floral decorations, so I'm looking for some floral wreath or some flowers or leaves on my stash. And I think the die set of kit 35 seems perfect to me. I'm gonna use some part of this oval frame. Also, to all these elements, I'm going to give a peach shade so that I have everything in the same style. Okay, now let's move on to the creation of the focal point, a nice twist ice cream with a strawberry and chocolate flavor. I'm going to prepare the base on ivory cardstock. Die cut the outlines of the ice cream on the pink pearlescent paper. And I proceed to give the vintage look to all the layers. I die cut the internal part of the twist on some chocolate paper to create the ice cream in the first video of the kit 41. And now I darken up the edges with Distress Ink Walnut Stain. Next, I glue everything with some liquid adhesive. Okay, all that's missing is the ice cream stick, which I'm going to die cut on craft paper. Well, now I'm ready to assemble the card. For the ice cream, I'm gonna use some foam pads to give dimension to the card. And we have come to the finishing touches. I'm going to glue a pale green button, a teal bow, which I'm going to dirty a little bit with the archival ink tea rose, and stick it with a glue dot. Finally, I'm going to create vanilla colored drops here and there, adding a small spiral with an antique pink vintage drop to each drop, so they will look like little candies. I fill the little heart of sentiment with the same vintage pink drop, and the card is finished. And this was the last card for today. I had a lot of fun creating these two vintage style cards. Hope I have given you some ideas on how to make cards in this style. In general, a little vintage photo is enough. I give you an appointment at the next video, where a fantastic graffiti style card awaits us, created with mixed media techniques. We will then see how to use the pink cotton paper from the kit. So I await for you. Thanks for watching, bye bye, and be colorful!